CHistrue here, and yeah, I tried to get this channel more in the direction of math and math proofs, but you guys have the Khan Academy. You can go there. This is a philosophy channel, and we're going to get into it. And we're going to have what might very well be a series on the debate between science and religion. I'm done arguing with people who don't believe in Copernicus or believe the Earth is flat. Look, guys, Coriolis effect. Look it up. Study the Foucault pendulum. Google it. I'm done here. I want to get to an honest debate between science and religion. In particular, in order to get to that honest debate, we need to get past some of the bromides on both sides. We need to get past Kent Hovind and Christopher Hitchens, which, by the way, would be reactionary versus neoconservative. You know, that's a pretty restricted region of debate there. But more to the point, it's a form of hero worship on both sides. And when you get to hero worship, you always have your critical faculties that are abandoned in the process. I want to start with some of the bromides hurled by people on the side of religion against people who are secular or on the side of science. And then I want to try to get to both sides equally so that you're going to all of you will thumb this video down. On the side of religion, I often hear that particularly religious conservatives will claim that people on the left are ethical relativists who believe that our rights derive from the state. That's a completely nonsensical argument. Quite the contrary, the whole foundational premise of the left, going back to Rousseau and the French Revolution and the radical end of our revolution and then the working revolutions, was the idea of absolute rights, or rights that transcended nation and culture. These were rights that were believed to be grounded in a state of nature. In the case of Locke and classical liberalism, they were rights to life, liberty, and property. In the case of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, there was more of a concept of the general will, more of a communitarian concept of rights, but at no point did he claim that rights derive from the state. Quite the contrary, if the movements of the left have always tended to oppose the existing order of society, and so they would not have claimed that rights derive from society. The feminist movements would not have derived rights from a patriarchy. The civil rights movements would not have derived rights from a racist society. The working movements would not have derived rights from existing capitalist society. So the idea that people on the secular left believe that rights derive from the state is an unhelpful argument. Now, you can point to the Russians and the Chinese communists. Granted, yes, they probably believed and still do, in the case of China and North Korea, believe in rights derived from the state. That would be a valid counterexample. But I would not consider them authentic heirs to the 19th century socialist tradition anyway. And so in their rhetoric and in their reality, there are two different things. So I would no more look to them than I would look to Jim Jones or David Koresh as an authentic expositors of Christianity. More broadly, there is the claim made by religious conservatives that people who believe in evolution are ethical relativists who merely want to justify their own immorality. And particularly, as is the case among religious rightists, they will focus on sexual immorality. Anybody who looks at lizards and their mating behavior, or birds and their mating behavior, and suddenly gets hot and excited, that person has a problem. I think that the accusation probably says more about the people making the accusation than it does about evolutionary biologists who study birds and lizards. I think that the people who study birds and lizards are interested in birds and lizards. I think they keep their sex lives quite separate. Thank you very much. And I also think, to cap off this particular part of the segment of the video, I think that the arguments from the religious right against Darwin would be a lot more consistent if they themselves didn't advocate economic policies that were themselves social Darwinist. In particular, I'm thinking of right-wing Republicans who advocate economic policies that are rabidly socially Darwinist, which, by the way, Richard Dawkins himself does not claim that Darwin applies to human society. He has disclaimed any kind of social Darwinist message. And so if that is the case, then, and he's supposedly the #1 expositor of Darwin, then why are Darwin's opponents the ones who are trying to apply ideas of competition or natural selection to human society? I think that there's a little something in the New Testament about having a mote in your own eye, trying to remove a speck from your brother's eye. That's probably found in classical Judaism too. I would imagine that it's probably in Hillel or some place there too. Why don't you follow that one, guys? And anyways, and I'll do the same. On the secular end of things, I think there are some arguments that are highly, highly unhelpful. For one thing, there's a claim made, I believe, by Krauss that people go to religion for an explanation of the natural world. Hence, by implication, science has a superior explanation of the natural world, and we don't need religion anymore. Pwned. People don't go to religion for a literal explanation of the natural world. It may be that religious philosophies purport to explain the natural world, particularly in their fundamentalist or literalist components or modalities, but people do not go to religion for an explanation of the natural world. People go to religion for communion with the divine. And that communion with the divine is reported in cultures all over the world. If you go to William James' Varieties of Religious Experiences, he talks about religions and cultures and the similarities all over the world. And I don't think that a narrow understanding of how religion came to be, that it came to be in order to explain the world in some literal sense, would do justice to the experiences of ecstatic experiences of religious believers and mystics all over the world, of a sense of oneness with the divine, reported globally. I think that that does not do justice to the actual reason for religion, and that would be the spiritual. I also think that there's a kind of almost contradictory explanation that gets out there that let's say Daniel Dennett and other people have come up with. It's a very old one, and that is that the reason religion evolved is because we were out there in the savannah and we had hungry lions, and so it was better to assume that a particular force in nature was a possible predator and to flee than it is to be a rationalist when you're out there in the middle of the savannah. And I'm thinking, that's pulling an explanation out of the evolutionary psych hat. The fact of the matter is that that may explain belief in demons, or creatures in the night, but I'm not sure how that explains belief in helpful spirits or helpful forces, or the belief in a creator, or belief in the ground of all being, or the divine. I'm not sure that one naturally leads to the other. I mean, it may be there may be a spandrel argument involved here. There may be possible arguments involved in the evolution of the neocortex, but these are long on narrative and short on actual proof or evidence. The fact of the matter is, all the evidence seems to suggest that the experience of the divine is the experience of the divine. Now, whether or not there is a naturalistic explanation for that or not, at the very least we have to understand what the experience is before going to a purely naturalistic explanation of that. The experience of the divine is not the experience of paranormal beliefs. It's not the experience of a mythology. It's not that you could maybe argue comes from narrative or comes from cultural memes that arise. But the actual experience of the divine is something different. If you look at William James and his Varieties of Religious Experience, he points to a very clear distinction between the exoteric and the esoteric, between the societal narrative and the narrative spun by the individual who is having the mystical experience, that there are actually very clear differences. That in the case of the person claiming an absolute experience of God, or an absolute experience perhaps of the Tao, or an absolute experience of some kind of mystical experience, maybe Georg Cantor's experience of the absolute, this person is speaking in an entirely different language than Looks like I'm going to have to do a part 2. Please watch both parts 1 and part 2 before you comment, guys. I'll see you on the other side.